น่าจะถึงเวลาแล้วนะครับก็สำหรับเซสชันนี้ครับก็จะเป็นเรื่องของ Bitcoin Sidechain นะครับก็มาทำความรู้จักกันกับSidechain ที่ทำงานร่วมกับ Bitcoin นะครับของคุณ Andreas Kohl นะครับ so welcome for your presentation.
Thanks everyone for coming to my presentation. I'm going to be focusing on Bitcoin sidechains. We're going to be talking about what they are, what they can be used for, and finally, full disclosure, I'm working on a Bitcoin sidechain myself, so I'm going to talk about what I personally think we can do and are doing to make a better Bitcoin sidechain. So, we need to close the pop-up. So first, a bit about the history of Bitcoin sidechains. It actually goes back a bit further than the timeline I have behind me. The first time someone described something that would today be called a sidechain, even though they didn't use that word, was in 2010 when Satoshi described the auxiliary proof of work consensus mechanism, which was basically a way for new blockchains to be able to reuse Bitcoin's proof of work. And it was first implemented the following year in 2011 with Namecoin, which actually still exists and is a blockchain used for management of censorship-resistant top-level domains. So that's actually a use case that's fallen out of fashion. I'm not going to be talking about it very much today. We're going to look at the use cases that are most prevalent for sidechains now. Those were actually first described in the paper that coined the term sidechain, which was written by Adam Back in 2014. So one of those use cases he describes is using a sidechain as a scaling network for a payment network for scaling Bitcoin payments. Now, this was in 2014, so 4 years before the first Lightning transaction. This was before the height of the block size wars. So we didn't know exactly how Bitcoin was going to scale. To be fair, we still don't know today, but I think we have a much clearer picture now. But the idea was that a sidechain can be used as a chain that uses a derivative of Bitcoin, a token that represents and is backed by Bitcoin as its native coin. And this leads us to a second use case that he proposes, which is innovation without speculation. So the idea here is that you can try out some things that could be useful in Bitcoin in the future, even changes at the protocol level, without actually changing Bitcoin first, which is something that you can already do. You could already do using testnets, but testnet doesn't have any economic value. So the idea is sidechain could be something where you could prove your concepts with some real economic incentives for people to come and try to break stuff and attack your tech. So the next use case is asset tokenization. Adam also describes it briefly in that white paper. The idea that different types of assets other than Bitcoin, other than money, could be represented by tokens, which could then be traded for Bitcoin. So this was first put into practice by Rootstock in 2017. And they additionally also used merge mining, something very similar to what Satoshi described in 2010 to reuse Bitcoin's proof of work. And the following year in 2018, Adam Back and Blockstream came up with Liquid. Then we saw sidechains in Ethereum, which we're not going to talk about today either, in the interest of time. And finally, now today, where at least Sequentia is trying to move the discussion in the direction of sidechains being networks that host tokenized assets, but which facilitate and optimize for swaps with real Bitcoin on the main chain or on the Lightning Network, rather than pegging Bitcoin on the sidechain. So going a bit more into depth into the idea of innovation without speculation, which is a great term that Adam Back coined. When we think about new layer ones, standalone blockchains that are not Bitcoin sidechains, that usually involves, it always involves introducing a new token that's required by the protocol to pay for transaction fees natively and directly on the network. And so Obviously, that represents a monetary use case. That's why we call them coins or shitcoins in competition with Bitcoin. Now, if you know anything about the theory of money, at least from an Austrian perspective, you know that money is meant to be a solution to the problem of double coincidences of wants in a barter economy. So in a barter economy, if you want to trade with someone that produces something that you're interested in, you need to also have something that they are interested in simultaneously to swap at that time. So money is a way for us to store value and use as a medium of exchange when we want something from someone and we don't have anything else that they're interested in. So whenever we have multiple monies in competition with each other, we are essentially going back to a system of partial barter. We again need some double coincidences of wants. We need people to be using the same money, and which is why many Austrian economists argue that in a fully free market, absent state coercion, we would eventually see a single monetary standard emerge, and it would be winner take all. Now, Bitcoin is the first open source distributed protocol for money, and it's as such it has the greatest network effect. And so the best scenario you can hope for when you start a new layer one is really for your technology to pressure and direct the direction of Bitcoin development. But eventually it all goes to zero against Bitcoin. So aside from this, there's also some common perverse incentives of shitcoining. I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I don't have to go too much into it. Deceptive marketing, pump and dumps. But one thing that doesn't get mentioned enough is so above, so below. The ecosystems that emerge under these incentives often reflect the moral values of their issuers. And so if you have someone that knows what they're doing and they're legitimately interested in building something censorship resistant, open source, and distributed, they're not going to go on Ethereum. So back to the idea of using sidechains as a transfer protocol for Bitcoin. Rootstock and Liquid both have this with PowPeg and DynaFed. I'm not going to go into the intricacies of the differences between these, both in the interest of time and because it's a little bit out of my technical depth. And they're more similar than they are different. Basically, the idea is that you have federations of entities that hold private keys to a multi-sig on Bitcoin, where you can send your Bitcoin and they will essentially issue the derivative over the sidechain. This is obviously an improvement over having a single custodian like wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum does. But it's still open to some attack vectors, especially state-sponsored attacks. Now, both in the case of Rootstock and Liquid, those federation members have HSMs, hardware security modules, which means that they need to actually be physically compromised in order to attack the network. And obviously, these are geographically distributed so that it's geopolitically unlikely for this to happen. But it is still within the realm of the imagination. So that's why there's proposals like drive chains, which would instead have the entirety of Bitcoin miners manage the peg. And we're going to go into some of the drawbacks that this still has even with the trust minimization. But the biggest drawback of BIP 300 is the fact that it requires a change to Bitcoin. So it requires a soft fork. It's not a very popular one. And so it's very unlikely that we'll see that happening. So the use case that I'm actually really interested in and I want to focus on for asset tokens for sidechains is asset tokenization. Now, when you think of asset tokenization, you're thinking of a single private issuer representing some kind of right that they confer to you through a token. Now, if you think about it that way, one of the first questions that might come up is, then why do we need a blockchain, right, if there's still a centralized issuer? Blockchain is a very inefficient and expensive technology, and one of the reasons why we use a blockchain in Bitcoin is precisely to manage the distributed issuance of BTC. So if you have centrally issued assets, why use a blockchain? Well, if you look at financial markets today, there's actually quite a bit more trust involved than just the single issuer. If you go to Nasdaq or the New York Stock Exchange and buy shares of your favorite company, Tesla or Apple, you're not actually becoming a shareholder of Tesla and Apple. This is something that very few people know, but 83% of all publicly traded stock in the United States is owned by a single entity called Seed and Co. That's CED and Co. You might want to look it up. It's an insane rabbit hole. It will really blow your mind. But basically, this is a private institution that's controlled by the government, just like the Federal Reserve. And just like the Federal Reserve, it's the source of countless immeasurable distortions in the market. So basically, if you go to Nasdaq and you buy Tesla shares, you're actually buying a claim to a claim to a claim along a long list of brokers, long line of brokers that ultimately ends at Seed and Co. And obviously, there's a settlement time that's measured in days between these brokers and Seed and Co. And ultimately, what this means is that you end up having brokers that sell or lend out securities that they don't necessarily know are actually available. So back in 2023, we had a notable example of this with the GameStop controversy. You might have heard the term naked short selling. So this is when brokers don't actually know or cannot even know how much of a stock is really available to lend out, and so they end up lending out more than that's really available, effectively inflating the supply of that security and manipulating the markets. Now, even if we assume that governments and financial intermediaries are going to be entirely benevolent and never going to use this to their own advantage, let's say to maximize profits from insider trading or front running or that kind of thing, this system is so inefficient that it still inherently implies distortions of a massive level, even if everyone is benevolent. So enough about that. Blockchains can solve this because tokens can essentially be used as bare digital financial assets. The ownership of these assets can be tied to the mere possession of the private keys that control these tokens. And you already see this today on Liquid, for example, with Stocker serving as a virtual asset service provider, which solves another problem, by the way, because obviously, regulated securities cannot be entirely permissionless. There are regulations, there are reporting requirements, but again, all of these can be streamlined and facilitated by tokenization. The generic term for this solution is access control lists, but there's different terms for every ecosystem. In Liquid, there's the Blockstream AMP system. That facilitates it. So you can have tokens that are entirely in user self-custody. They're the only ones that can control them, but the asset issuer knows their identity, whitelists them, and has to permission any transfer to anyone else. So they can keep a whitelist of where the token can be sent. So some example use cases, stablecoins are the lowest hanging fruit on the road to hyper-Bitcoinization. Other types of securities will probably be more common in a hyper-Bitcoinized world. They're going to be increasingly more denominated in Bitcoin, like MicroStrategy, and become instruments for BTC accumulation. And there's other things like NFTs for real estate that can be done, and all of that. So you might ask yourself, why not tokenize directly inside of Bitcoin? After all, Bitcoin is the most distributed, the most permissionless blockchain out there. So why don't we just use that directly? Well, tokenization actually started out that way. The first protocols for tokenization back in 2014, I believe, 2013, colored coins. To use their terminology, it allowed you to take a Satoshi and color it to represent something else. Obviously, one limitation of this approach that we figured out very early was scalability, because Bitcoin block size is limited, and that's a good thing. We want it that way, but it also means that if you're going to use Bitcoin block space for anything other than just pure monetary settlement, pure settlement of BTC transfers, you're going to have to end up competing against these purely monetary Bitcoin transfers, Bitcoin transactions for Bitcoin block space. These protocols are slightly more recent. They're slightly more interesting technologically because they are very efficient in how they use Bitcoin block space, especially compared to some other things that we're hearing about these days, like runes and BRC20s, which are actually technologically very primitive and a lot closer to colored coins from 2014. But what these protocols allow you to do is to be very efficient in how you use Bitcoin block space and use the Lightning Network for token transfers, which means potentially that most of the throughput of these tokenized assets doesn't necessarily need to take up any Bitcoin block space at all. Now, the drawback with this approach is that you still need to use Bitcoin block space. There's some very specific cases in which you're going to commit data to the Bitcoin blockchain and write inside Bitcoin transactions. One of them is asset issuance. Whenever you issue a new asset, channel management to open a new channel or balance liquidity. And also, whenever you're transferring any token that doesn't have enough liquidity to justify using over Lightning, because not every token will be viable over Lightning due to liquidity. So that's roughly the justification for using a sidechain. But what are the problems with existing sidechains today? Well, first of all, I talked a bit about pegging Bitcoin. Actually, ironically, the types of Bitcoin derivatives that have the most value locked are the most centralized right now. There's 170,000 BTC on Ethereum. This is back from April, but I don't think it's changed much. 70,000 on Binance and Huobi, which both have a single custodian, and only 5,000 on LBTC and RBTC combined, which have federations. So obviously there's some counterparty risk, especially with the wrapped Bitcoin on Ethereum and Binance and Huobi. But beyond counterparty risk, the even bigger problem is network effects being segregated. Obviously, if the token isn't perfectly interoperable with BTC, with real BTC on the main chain, then it's not fungible with Bitcoin. And if it's not fungible, then it has separate liquidity, and that defeats the purpose of a sidechain if your purpose is asset tokenization and allowing trades against Bitcoin. So obviously, it also has implications in terms of user experience. Whenever you issue a new coin, whether that's a pegged Bitcoin or a standalone shitcoin, that creates a problem for users who are, let's assume, only interested in other different tokenized assets on your network, because then they have to acquire a new token that they weren't previously interested in just to be able to use your network. That means jumping through some hoops, whether that's pegging into a pegged Bitcoin or buying a token on a centralized exchange or so. It also has some implications for scalability, because obviously then you have a lot of on-chain transactions with the only purpose of enabling other transactions to come along later. And besides, using a sidechain for scaling a main chain isn't really logical. If you're going to have the same types of transactions on the sidechain as you have on the main chain, you're just adding more block space, you're just shifting the goalposts, and it's just going to get clogged up the same way as the main chain will. So that's why I would claim that a sidechain should be reserved for different types of payments than its main chain should be. So if the main chain is for monetary payments, the sidechain should be for other types of financial assets other than money. So to build a better Bitcoin sidechain, we're proposing to combine the best of the trade-offs of tokenizing inside of Bitcoin UTXOs, which namely the user experience, with the scalability of using a sidechain. So with Sequentia, you can imagine a Sequentia wallet is starting first and foremost as a Bitcoin wallet, standard Bitcoin wallet using all the standard tag BIP39 and so on, with Lightning integration as well. And then from the same seed phrase that you generated your Bitcoin public private key pairs with, you can also generate Sequentia public private key pairs. So a single seed, which will allow you to store tokenized assets issued on Sequentia in that wallet. You'll be able to pay transaction fees or propose transaction fees on the sidechain using any asset issued on the sidechain. And from this same wallet, you'll be able to swap back and forth between these tokenized assets and Bitcoin. So the way we're achieving this is we're using the Elements code base, which is the same code base that Blockstream prepared for the Liquid network and is itself a fork of Bitcoin Core. We're making the following changes. First, a free market for transaction fees. So that's replacing the policy asset in Liquid, which is LBTC, with a free market for transaction fees. As I said, users proposing transaction fees using any asset in their wallet. The second one is anchoring to Bitcoin. That's a consensus rule which requires every Sequentia block to have a reference to a Bitcoin block at an equal or greater height than the Bitcoin block referred to by the previous Sequentia block, which sounds kind of complicated, but all it means is that both chains reorganize together. If there's an orphan block on Bitcoin, every block on Sequentia that refers to it must also be discarded. And that's what allows us to have swaps with Bitcoin in real time. Because cross-chain atomic swaps, just to sidetrack a little bit here very quickly, are not a new technology. They've been around for a long time. The first time there was a cross-chain atomic swap, I think, was in 2014 between Bitcoin and Litecoin. And so how that works is basically I could send you some Bitcoin. I attach a secret to it so that you can only unlock those Bitcoins and grab those Bitcoins when you send me the agreed amount of Litecoins. And then when you send me the agreed amount of Litecoins and I have access to those Litecoins, you can then grab those Bitcoins. The problem with that approach is that if we trust this swap to sell immediately or from one Bitcoin confirmation, then we might end up having a reorg on Bitcoin. The block where I sent you the Bitcoin could be orphaned. And then because Litecoin doesn't know what happens in Bitcoin, I could end up having my Bitcoin back, but I still have your LTC. And the only way to solve this is to have to add a time lock to this swap to protect against reorgs. Now, the time lock, unfortunately, makes the swap not very useful because most people don't want to sit around and wait 3, 6, 9 hours to finish swapping assets, which is why we have anchoring, which makes it so that we can have atomic swaps without an additional time lock for reorg protection. So those are the first two changes that we're making, and we're launching Sequentia just with this. Aside from those two things, it's going to be identical to Liquid in the beginning. But later on, we also would like to open up the federation of block creators, because initially we're going to have a small federation that just produces blocks, doesn't manage a peg because we don't have a peg. But similar to Liquid, they'll be collecting all the transaction fees on our behalf and sending them to us, the company developing Sequentia. But eventually we'd like to open that up so that anyone can be a block signer and collect transaction fees on Sequentia. So that will mean that you'll be able to have a decentralized exchange fully on Lightning. Because Lightning swaps also have the same problem as atomic swaps. If you have a forced channel closure and a reorg coincidentally at the same time, you could have the same scenario that I described with Litecoin. So anchoring also facilitates purely Lightning swaps where assets on both chains are loaded into Lightning. And you could also have purely on-chain atomic swaps and submarine swaps where you have Bitcoin on Lightning and assets on-chain on Sequentia and so on. But that's it in a nutshell. Thanks for your attention, and I don't know if we have time for any questions. Do we have time for any questions? Yeah.
So that's good presentation. Do you have any questions about the sidechain? Okay.
How does making the like two consensus systems
Yeah, so the anchoring consensus rule is going to be basically a read-only relationship between Sequentia and Bitcoin, where when you create a new Sequentia block, the first line of the block has to be the hash of a Bitcoin block at an equal or greater height than the Bitcoin block referred to by the previous Sequentia block. So that because we're going to have a higher block frequency, that means that multiple Sequentia blocks could refer to the same Bitcoin block, and then if the Bitcoin block gets orphaned, and any cross-chain swap that disappears on one side will also disappear on the other side.
Yeah, so I get how the consensus systems are built, but could it still happen that like, so I would like lock up a Bitcoin UTXO and like an HTLC, and then that will happen on the asset chain as well. Is that how the cross-chain swaps work?
Your Bitcoin would never be represented on the sidechain itself.
Yeah.
So on the Bitcoin blockchain, there's only a Bitcoin transaction happening, with an HTLC with the secret that you lock, and on the Sequentia side, there's only an asset transfer happening.
And these are both like zero conf transactions on both chains. That's how it is.
So you can essentially trust it from zero conf because it's not settled from zero conf, but it is relatively settled relative to Bitcoin. So if the settlement fails on Bitcoin, it has to fail on the sidechain as well.
And how does that work? Because like, could I not like double spend the Bitcoin transaction, but then the other person doesn't double spend the asset chain transaction?
No, if you double spend on one side, you're also double spending on the other side. Or at least you have the opportunity to.
Thank you.
So we have around 20 minutes for question. If you have any question, please feel free. มีคนไทยคนไหนต้องการถามอะไรไหมครับเดี๋ยวผมช่วย translate ให้ได้ครับ No question? Okay.
If have any more questions later on, or anyone viewing this online, you can email me at andreas@sequentia.io.
Yeah.
And just for the record, we have a testnet out, or SIGNet rather. You can find that on our website, and we should hopefully be at mainnet by the end of this year or early next year. Thank you.
Okay ครับ